So we're finally getting comics back into shops. After a long delay, long for DC, longer for Marvel, the independent's kind of in some disarray. What are the big challenges that people are going to have getting back going again, and who's going to come out a little bit better coming out of the break? Well, conventional wisdom has said DC because they got going faster. They set up more of kind of these other pieces of the infrastructure, added some distribution options, and gave people a few more ways to do things. But it's a little bit more complex of a story by that. And so let me go into it. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. It's easy to play armchair quarterback. It's easy to sit back and kind of be able to say, well, this company did it well and this company did not, and being able to make those calls. Hindsight is always 2020, but I think as we now have both of the major publishers out shipping comics again, the indies are shipping comics again, things are slowly getting back to normal. We can say with a little bit more certainty kind of who's going to shake out the winners and losers, what are going to be the big losses or problems coming out of this pandemic and this break, and what can we look forward to? So in the areas of being kind of predictive, the first comment that is worth noting is, are we out of the woods? Is it over? And it depends on who you listen to. I think that there's certainly some elements of the news that really want to keep the pandemic going as long as possible. And I think there's a natural human nature thing that is at play where, I mean, the reality is more people are going to die from COVID. Probably quite a lot of people are still going to die from COVID, just like a lot of people die from the flu and from other things. Now, I'm not saying COVID's, is not bad or anything like that. It's bad and it transmits easily, and all the rest of these things are true. But the reality is, we don't track, deaths from automobile accidents and other things like we have for COVID. We haven't tracked flu deaths in the past like we have for COVID. If we had, we may have shut down parts of the country, just like we did for COVID. We might have been doing that 2 years ago. The flu season 2017 was bad. Was it as bad as COVID? No, it was not, but it was still very bad. And unfortunately, that because everything is polarized and politicized, anybody that says what I just said is quickly labeled a denier. I mentioned this on Twitter that if we had tracked some of these other causes of death like we had for the pandemic for COVID, that it would be horrifying to a lot of people. It'd be shocking. And immediately I got a very nasty response like, you want your grandma to die? It's like, okay, all right. Number one, grandma's already dead. Number two, that's not what I'm saying at all. And you guys need to stop being ridiculous. You can't start assuming somebody believes something because they say one other thing. That's just stupid, and it's just stupid, and it does not help. But I have muted and unfollowed a ridiculous amount of people from Twitter who just they're not able to just have normal conversations. They're not able to even wrestle with this kind of stuff. But where comics are concerned, we don't yet know. We're assuming that there's not going to be another hiccup and another pause. And one hopes not. I mean, even though there's these threat of the second wave and all the rest, it doesn't feel like we're going to be getting things shut down again. I think by and large, while nobody will admit it, the shutdowns did not prove to be the most effective way of helping the virus. I think it'd be very interesting always in time to kind of go back in time and replay this one and not shut things down and see if we would have gotten a dramatically higher number. My suspicion is we would not have. I don't think the shutdowns were what really helped things. And, I think that funneling everybody into a couple businesses that were open, like grocery stores, I think probably wasn't the smartest move. If you're talking about keeping people isolated, then saying, hey, 90% of the shops that you were going to are shut down, it's only 10% are open. Please don't go wandering around. I think all you did was funnel more people into smaller places, but that maybe not. That's just me. But I think that if we're looking into the future of the comics, the big unknown is, are we going to see any kind of repeat or return of any of this stuff? And the answer is probably no, but that's still hanging out there for us. So putting that aside, what do we know? DC got the jump on things by putting some other distribution in place and getting their comics out a little faster and trying to protect themselves. I think that was a smart move. But it turns out that hasn't been the biggest factor. It hasn't been as much of a lead as I personally and others thought it would be. I thought this would be something that would actually cause DC to jump ahead. But what actually happened is a number of comic shops just decided to wait it out, which is both disappointing because a lot of these comic shops have complained about Diamond for forever. And so the fact that they kind of settled with the I'll just wait for Diamond to return it tells the comic publishers that despite all the complaints, people are just they're not as serious. They can kind of be ignored. Unfortunately, I think that's a lesson some of the publishers are going to take from this is that retailers who have continuously complained about the supply chain, when given the chance to do something different, didn't. That's a bad surprise, and I think it speaks it tells us that comic retailers are not going to be paid attention to as much in the future, and they already weren't much at all. But I think DC will get a little bit of a jump on things. The more interesting advantage that I think DC has is through kind of sheer luck. They were kind of getting ready. They had kind of closed one act of their stories and were getting ready to launch another. They were getting ready to launch Death Metal and all the crossovers and all the things to come out of it when the shutdown occurred. So they were at a kind of a natural jumping off point, a little bit like a television series goes into fall sweeps and then there's no new shows through the winter. And then January, February comes back with new episodes. So you get kind of a cliffhanger, a delay, and then new shows. That's how DC's pause felt. There were very few comics that were disrupted, like right in the middle of an arc. Probably Detective Comics or Batman was probably the biggest one that was kind of in the middle of some things. But even that, you had this storyline that was really kind of a teaser prelude to Joker War, and they're introducing Punchline and everything else. But the way the core story was constructed, it didn't really feel like we were missing out on stuff. We had the designer as a villain, but it was a new villain. So it was the lightest weight cliffhanger of anything. Everything else had this kind of natural build-up point. We knew Death Metal was coming, everything else. The other piece is this pause did give DC a chance to kind of step back, evaluate Dan Didio's departure also, and say, do we really want to do 5G? How do we want to do it? Maybe let's retune it a little bit. And that was smart of them to do so. So I think that created an interesting potential positive for them and everything that they did. So that's where DC I think has some advantages. Marvel, on the other hand, is a weirder mix. So one, the delay with Marvel I think still has to be felt. They're still in this world where they're putting out new comics and waiting a week and then putting out new comics and waiting a week. So they're not back fully up to speed, and it feels more clunky. And they definitely feel like they're delaying kind of getting back to active service. And that I think sets up kind of a different problem for them. Unlike DC, again, kind of by happenstance, a lot of their storylines and their titles were right in the middle of things. Marvel, their storytelling approach was a little bit more kind of fluid, I guess is the best way to put it, a little bit more amorphous. So their storylines are kind of trundling along. And this delay is kind of it's not absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's just absence makes the heart forget. There a lot of their storylines. I mean, there are a lot of people coming back to Marvel. Visited a comic shop yesterday, and the guy's like, "Yeah, a lot of people just dropped Marvel over the last month. Not completely, but a lot of the storylines. There's a few people are still kind of interested to see where Thor is going and a couple other books, but a lot of that stuff has cooled down considerably. Guardians of the Galaxy is like ice cold right now." A lot of Avengers is just very, very lukewarm. Spider-Man is kind of stumbling to kind of get back into the picture. Even the X-Men books, all those Dawn of X books that are out and everything else, there's not any like real feeling like, oh, I gotta find out what happens next. There's nobody who really is anxious. The Marauders has probably the biggest hook going on right now with is Kitty Pryde dead or not? But Excalibur, it's like it didn't leave anybody desperate to find out what's happening now. X-Men has been doing a one and done kind of issues for a while. I think there's some people who are kind of interested to see where that Children of the Vault thing is going, but in general, there's Marvel doesn't have a lot of people really anxious to show up to the shop and find out where these storylines are going. They have people anxious to show up to the shop and kind of buy Marvel again because they love Marvel. That's good, but it would be better if they had storylines that people were really interested to find out where they're going. And unfortunately, there's very, very little where that feeling exists for Marvel's comics right now. That's potentially a bad sign. So I think the interesting story will be to look at it and say August and really assess: are we where are things? Is Marvel in where's Marvel? Where's DC? My feeling is that come August, DC is going to be well into death metal. They're going to be trying to get everybody very excited about that story and where everything's going and big storylines. That's where their heads are going to be at. And Marvel is going to be trying to get X of Swords and Empire going, and there's very tepid interest in those things. So it's they're going to have to do something to get people super excited about their books, and we haven't seen it yet. They're just right now Marvel's playing game of you like Marvel, you miss Marvel, Marvel's back in the shops, come buy your Marvel, and that's not terrible. But DC has actually given some reasons for people to want to get to the shop. In terms of the independents, I think there's a couple storylines that are probably very beloved that people are anxious to, get back to and figure out where those are going. But by and large, you don't have any kind of big cliffhanger serials where people are interested in that stuff either. It's so comics. Unfortunately, I made this prediction a while back that somewhere, and I say by the end of the year, I think we're going to see about a 20% loss of comic shops in the country, and I think we're going to see about a 20 to 25% drop in overall sales. I think that that's something we're kind of looking at, where there's just going to be a lot of the interesting thing will be to see in August, when both companies are back up to speed, come back in say October, and are people buying everything they were buying before? My suspicion is that you're going to see everybody will just buy kind of out of 5 titles, they'll buy 4. They'll just drop one book. And I think you're going to see a lot of people using this as kind of a hopping off point because there wasn't enough of a hook to bring people in. And we haven't seen anything on the horizon. I think death metal is it for DC, but on Marvel's side, we haven't seen any books that are that you really got to look forward to. You've got to buy this. We haven't seen those. They're probably out there, but they haven't emerged yet, and that's what Marvel's going to have to do to get back in the game. But anyway, that's my prediction for what the next couple months are going to look like as things get back to quote unquote normal and what we have to shake out. What do you think? Leave your predictions below in the comments. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications if you care to. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Most importantly, thanks for listening.